Hi. Um, okay. First, I'd like to thank everyone to be able to come here today. Sorry, and I'd like to thank Celia and the Planimage, and also and especially Capgain for inviting me. Also, and I'm sorry. I restart. I'd like to thank Celia Auden and the Planimage for inviting me, and especially Capgain for making it possible for me to come to this great event. So thank you, everyone. Please be kind. That's my very first talk. That's why I'm so shy. And I'd like to play a short game with you, shall we? So, what does badass have in common? I will lecture the picture to think about it, while I will explain to you some stuff. Last year, I had to write a memoir. The Sublime of Failure, which is the title, is an idea I borrowed from semiotics and game design, which enable us to question our judgment about disability, dysfunction, and disorder, too often considered as a mere failure in our societies. And in game design, the Sublime of Failure is related to the procedural rhetoric from Jan Bogost about offering a game that will question the game design, but from the point of view of the player. And how, by turning the rule upside down, questioning our reality, and with persuasive mechanics. So what they have in common is that most of them overcome a disability, some of them are full of intersectionality, and all of them is an apology for ableism. So in terms of game design and UX, it has given them an agency to perform and to continue after the tutorial phase, such as Sekiro, who without his new arm wouldn't be able to fight anymore. And today, our portrayal of disability is still fundamentally biased and wrong, because these characters don't have a disability. They just are the quintessence of transhumanism, soup, and cliché about what should be diversity. So even if we have laws here in Europe that aim to consider and to integrate better disabled people, in numbers and fact, we still face this community in many ways. And even in our own sector, this community is merely represented. So if mental health and disability are about being different, yet it doesn't have to be that visible or written on your face, such as having Down syndrome or losing an arm. And even if it's that visible, you can make a change and not state the obvious for players. So I perfectly understand that showing what a disability is difficult, or might not sound that ethical to do. Yet, it is not impossible, I think. So for my memoir, I focus on invasive troubles of the development, so-called TED in French, such as autism. And I found almost nothing except some small, very indie game on Steam, for instance. These are about sensory simulation or stimulation. And I also found some serial games, such as French one, Sarah. But this community stated on this. This game, indies or serious game, don't help them to feel better or to have fun. They state the abuse again. So sure, autism can be about sensory stimulation or simulation, social skills and communications. But like anyone else, they want to go on an adventure, be Link, Godzilla, go through space and time. By the way, did you know that the Maori word for autism was takiwatonga, which means his or her own time and space? I think this is a beautiful definition. And Mr. Coster said here in 2017, there are a lot of ways to define experience. And people with disability shouldn't be excluded for that, because they can communicate in all sorts of things in all sorts of different ways. But this is what we do to make it convenient for the majority. So where are games where we can be night and still autistic? And where to start? I sure have counterexamples of games and movies that do things differently, and I will talk about some of them later. So, why I'm discussing this? I'm Gwendoline Garon, 28 years old, and some people may think of me as a professional failure. I haven't worked for big companies of big video game yet, and if I'm such a failure, it's because I had great difficulty integrating into the video game industry, or social, anything, because I had good reasons. I knew from childhood that I'm part of the neurodiversity community, and I discovered that I'm autistic at 22 years old after a burnout. So I started a full academic course, as you can see, and my goal that started more than 4 years ago is to discuss the lack of knowledge and recognition we have about mental health and disability in our pop culture, social, everything. I like to see things globally and as a systemic process that requires interdisciplinarity. And my first attempt was about the psychological analysis of the game Her Story. And to sum up, I do academic game studies, creative researches, I'm a game UX consultant and a 2D artist. I'm basically mostly working with indies, and this year I will focus on the playful practices of the disabled player through the French association CapGain, which you will have a presentation tomorrow afternoon by Jérôme Dupire. And I will share to you some of my many insights and how I confine theories in the aim of creating a proof of concept for my memoir called Fragmented. So, there is something difficult to work with in UX. Emotion. Sure, they are hard to measure. We can't rely 100% on machines. People lie, but we cannot throw away the information that emotion gives us. I'd like to see emotion and behavior as sensible system, predictable. And in cognitive science, Stanislas Dehaene made a full course about the Bayesian theory, about understanding and predicting behaviors. And at the beginning, it was only mathematical tools and theory. But the thing is, our brain can be seen as a predictive system because brains infer from sensory inputs, such as emotion and behaviors, to an internal model of the external world. So this theory also have counterexample. But in UX, concerning emotion, I think we should definitely deepen this model and the whole attribution process. So remember when I said I had counterexample myself. In 2017, I had a glimpse of an insight and deepened it with the game Hellblade. In this game, Senua is struggling with psychosis. She has to fight against shadow warriors. She has also voices discouraging her, illusion and false memories, the whole package. But the thing is, during the process of making this game, they work with neuroscientists, mental health specialists, and patients too. And what interests me the most here is the fundamental feeling they used, anxiety and the whole work about letting go of something by stopping the fight and the struggle. So at the end of the journey, spoilers, she has to let go of the head she's carrying, and the player has to accept the fact it's impossible to win through a never-ending fight. So just like Senua, with her, we have to let it go. We have to cease to fight, and we have to accept there is nothing to win because that's not the right fight. It's a mixed feeling between the player and the character, hand in hand, where both must experience the loss of a feeling. It hurts, and it's perfectly fine, and here comes the persuasive mechanics. The rhetoric of failure, again, from Jan Bogost, where we play with players' heuristic and BA to make them understand that it can only be won by not playing it at all. When the players play, they form some idea about the world and its system we model. And we can sure lure them to dead ends and to think twice, just like in the game history I mentioned before, and where we play with players' red herring effect and in hindsight. But the work this specialist made is, for me, for Hellblade, the proof of the first wave theory in psychology. It's all about acceptance instead of avoidance, by working both on emotion and on behaviors. They succeeded to use them and to make it understandable by people not only concerned by psychosis, such as maybe on the spectrum, and has the black box cut the essence of a psychological problem. They make it understandable by by using persuasive mech and, among others, the priming techniques. From binaural song, her asymmetrical and frightened posture, everything will speak for anxiety and the fierce but unwilling struggle for self-forgiveness. Senua could have been anybody, any color skin, from any country. What matters here is emotion and narrative that all humanity can understand and to lead to a change of behavior, emotions. So, aren't game and movie all about priming? Are we given third and second exposure to one stimulus to influence a response to a subsequent stimulus? We sure do. There are indeed a lot of ways to define experience. Since I'm back at the university, I have time to read, try theory, and fail. Because time passes and we forget even good ideas, my first attempt ended up being a kind of a serious game, looking just like Dropsy, stating the obvious about sensory stimulation from an autistic point of view. So I changed my approach, created a small concept on my own, and understand that I had to work on emotion, and first, what's emotion? Then I was in Canada and read about Bernard Perron and horror in games and movies. I really do think that using persuasive mech is one of the key to work with emotion. Indeed, it's enabled us to use the inherent subjectivity of video games to create dissonances into players' brain, to change and influence the player preconception and understanding of a situation. So in horror games and movies, it's exactly what they do. They induce fear and then anguish by using very small details, sounds, and cameras angles. And most important, they play with our fundamental fear. So I made El Coco, a boogeyman. And just like in Yoma Wali, you just have to face childhood fear. And it's a concept based on a runner, a basic go-through-hell game design mixed with Slenderman, collect things and go, escape quick. So fear is what makes you run. And, just like in Hellblade and Inside 2, you literally go deeper and deeper into darkness. And even better, the player has to play more within his own fear than the real threat. Because the fear of the dark and the unknown is universal, and the scare of getting caught is a strong stressor too. But the problem remained: how to make a change understandable by the player. As you can see in this slide, there is a vertical runner, and then the player didn't understand the meaning behind the need to change the rules. And I observed that the main reason was only because they didn't have to do it by themselves. They weren't emotionally involved in. So I made another last attempt, a couple months before my memoir, and I made a lot of theoretical progress. So video games become expressive when we encourage players to interrogate and reconcile their vision of the world with what we introduce them through a game. They need to fix the cognitive dissonance they are given to create a new understanding for both worlds. And with the autistic community, I observed that the main reason would be, the main thing to question would be social anxiety or social rejection. And if we go that way, ostracism, what a considerable amount of people are living and feeling. So I made a GDD about the social theory of Erving Goffman and Howard Becker. What about a game where the player is an outsider, seeing himself as different as villagers see him, but can't see himself different as other outsiders? Playing with color is easier to illustrate our lack of understanding that we are all the same, made from different shades and shapes, and everything is always a question of perception. So what would have a player to do to understand it? The player will be the Piper of Hamelin and will use the outsider as Pikmins. And these Pikmins, the purple character, by the way, the Pikmins are also all different, and the player will discover it through the game to solve puzzles and eventually will emotionally bond with them. And at the middle of the game, the player will have the opportunity to change the rules and to question the game. The choice is simple, yet about ethic, because it's all about Popper and the paradox of tolerance. The player can either turn back outsider through their true colors and own individuality, everyone is different, or to let things go just like they were before and becoming purple too, and understanding ostracism by living it. Through this work, I stated that, emotionally speaking, autism is much more about frustration than about ostracism. And damn, we hate frustration, not being considered, not being heard or misunderstood. And everybody hates that, especially player, right? Then I got my final idea for my memoir. What if in a game such as an RPG, you can't interact with others? This is Fragmented. This time I mixed everything I found that was relevant or important. I thought about the game A Blind Legend because you can be a blind knight, Senua was struggling with her own fight, the Maori word for autism, etc. So Fragmented is a story about an autistic knight who thinks she is cursed, outcast by others. She must fight, but she is losing herself doing it. It exhausts her. If you were wondering why it's a girl, it's not because I'm one too, but because women tend to be less diagnosed than men. And I'm just an autistic advocate here. Since I don't want it to be a serious game, I thought a lot about our game. They are, to me, kinda rhetorically violent. Still, they support the idea that we can bring the player through the art to an awareness of a social reality. This way, it allows me to use persuasive design. I've also decided that you wouldn't read and hear autism until the very end of the game. Because if you want to produce a change about something people don't want to read about, you have two solutions. Go out and loud, or swim under the surface, which I prefer. And because I use different kinds of figure, theories, and symbolics, everything must be systemic. So before testing each element on their interconnection, from what they are and mean, and if our societies are still using them, and how to be able to be able to reuse them too, I had first to do a huge anthropological survey, a sort of control-proof read of the society. Were you aware, or did you know, that we tend to reuse the figure of night, and in our present time, glitch art, especially in dark social moments of the society, to talk about something that annoys or is against our systems, and to raise a voice to defend something. Night and glitch art are by essence persuasive design and mechanic. So a knight has to fight, doesn't it? Well, not an autistic knight. Just like Vanellope from the movie Wreck-It Ralph, my knight will be a symbol of true self-acceptance and will embrace what she is to change the rule of her game. So my player on my knight will have to accept that she won't fit, that she's glitching, that's okay, that's her strength. Sure, it's an art game, and I can use symbol to confirm my message, and question the player too. So why not using a spoon as a sword to aware the player about the spoon theory and to induce to the player the idea of self-economy or self-awareness by not fighting? If you fight, your spoon sword life bar will diminish until you die. Such as someone concerned by a long-standing illness or a disability, this injustice the player will experience will lead him to try to throw the system and the frustration. Because frustration is, for me, a design opportunity with a raw, burning energy, asking for changes. I also use chess metaphor in order to break the rules. What if in a game such as an RPG, you couldn't interact with others, and how can you make it visible for the players? In this fragmented universe, the ground is composed of tiles which refer to both a chessboard and a metaphor of rules and norms that seems so disintegrating for autistic people. However, each of the players' steps disrupt his entire ecosystem, since the tiles of the game board are mobile. Check the guy here. Oops, here. By performing a step on his actual right, the player will sure move on his actual right, but all the parallel rows will move to the opposite side, on left, alternative one row from the knight's position. This way, knight and NPC will stay in distance, until the player gets through the frustration and understand that he can break rules by using by himself the controllers in an inverted ways and start to dance around NPCs into a systemic displacement. I know it's a rule restriction action, but by giving the player a chance of understanding by acting behaviors and by feeling just enough of frustration to challenge himself, cognition and emotion, this enables players to open up to something different with the priming technique to make them receptive for the message about autism. Although it isn't very ethical in terms of cognitive load, I know too, it still works, and if players are penalized, this is not too badly. This gets the game back on track, encouraging players to work harder to keep their way through the game and the narrative, and they are totally connected and involved in. So, remember that what I presented to you were only selected and short brief of some of my work. And here are my takeaways. First, stop trying to fix disabled people. Ask yourself if what you're doing is transhumanistic, about overcoming something, creating a new self, and if yes, try to keep my voice in mind that you should reconsider working it. Oops. We are worth it, and we can be disabled on whatever else we want to be too. So remember that diversity is a real strength. And I can assure you, being a social failure isn't a bad thing, neither is a disability. I won't force you to integrate us, but you should definitely ask us the failure about how we see things, and we may help you to go further and to improve for the good of all. Emotion and disability are domain to polish. If making video game accessible is easier and more impactful than before, identifying and removing barriers should be a standard too. Still, this isn't the truth, but maybe we can improve it by working on emotion. Behind the state of a feeling such as fun and flow, we care a lot in UX. Remember that everything is linked to the oppression of a basic and raw emotion, such as fear or anxiety. And this being said, if you choose wisely to create a game about mental health or with a character with a disability, you will have to work hard to make us shine. And in order to do that, remember, that our industry operates in a vacuum and has social issues with the integration of what's different. So open up to disability as much as to any other difference. Integrate us from the very beginning to the test you will have to make anyway, to test the validity of the representation you're willing to share, to see if that represents and fits most of your targets. Without another, that's the most important. And also remember that from a marketing point of view, we are still your missing target. This one is obvious, but our society don't want to hear anymore that we have to make mistakes to learn and to improve ourselves. So take risks and make some mistakes in order to improve your game design and UX. We tend to get too comfortable with our procedure and go back to bad habits such as isolating ourselves. And then go out, go wild and go loud, but not too loud at the end of this talk, please. We currently are in troubled times where many minorities are raising their voices. You can join us, or you can join the research team too. You can help those minorities by standing up with new ideas and techniques and mechanics and theories, just like I did with my use of priming, persuasive mech, Bayesian theory and all. Last but not least, remember, and that's the QA part now. Thanks.
So we have time for a couple of questions. You spoke very fast. So let's take a look at the slide. So it's a bit like, I think the previous one was, yeah, the recent, like go all the way. Yeah, is this the, yeah, go all the way to the top. Okay, so there's no more recent question. Do we have any question in the audience? Yes, the question over there. So catch the mic. Whoa, good job.
Is it, yes. Do you know any French association that, I'm a game designer, and that could link us to neurotypical people to have some contacts, maybe?
For the neurotypical, like autism, you mean?
For example, yeah.
No.
No.
But about all the other kind of handicap and disability, Capgame is one of the French one you can find. They basically work with them to create new system to use controllers, not game design, just controllers. And this is what I will do this year. I will work with them to help them. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Is there another question? Yes, there's a question here.
Thank you for the great talk. My question is around recruiting for asking questions, like you said, integrating neurodiverse people into the process of research. Do you have any suggestions for how to incorporate that into things like research screeners, or how to even begin looking for those resources when we're doing that kind of research?
There is two ways, I think. Some player on the internet asking developers to consider them. Actually, there are a lot of them on Twitter, some on YouTube, because they try to play and they say, "Oh, see, I can play it and everything." So maybe it will be a great idea to create a database about them, to be able to ask them sometimes. The other way should be from the developer to ask them to communicate about it, to say, hey, we want to question you, we want to go to meet you and everything. So that would be also a good solution, because from now I'm the only one I know. That would be a good start, yeah. But if you want to conduct some tests, you should ask. There is many groups of disabled people, players, and they are just asking for you to meet halfway. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gwendoline. So we're gonna break.